Hi everyone, and welcome to another edition of Between the Rows. I'm Lisa Guenther, editor of Canadian Cattlemen and your host this week. I caught up with Fawn Jackson of the Canadian Cattlemen's Association last week to find out what the new federal budget means to ranchers and beef farmers.
There was a very significant investment in that merging of environment and agriculture. And I think it speaks to agriculture having said for a long time, we have more that we can offer for environmental solutions, but we also need investments that go with them.
Piper Whelan brings us an interview with Reg Schellenberg, the new CCA president, on his priorities for the next 2 years.
We want to maintain a viable industry, preserve it, protect it, and promote it, and make sure that there's an opportunity for the next generations to carry it forward.
And we'll hear from Bob Lowe, who recently completed his 2-year term as Canadian Cattlemen's Association president.
It was 2 years and 11 days ago, March 13th, 2020, which was a Friday, by the way, that I got elected to the presidency of the Canadian Cattlemen's Association. That was on as I said, a Friday. We got out Friday night, and Monday they locked the country down for COVID.
But first, here's a word from our sponsor.
AGI West Steel manufactures the highest quality galvanized grain bins on the market. With over a century of experience, our quality designs and storage options deliver the right solution to suit your needs. Visit aggrowth.com/weststeel for more information. That's aggrowth.com/weststeel.
We're back. You're listening to Between the Rows, and I'm your host, Lisa Guenther. It was a little more than 2 years ago that Bob Lowe was elected president of the Canadian Cattlemen's Association at the group's AGM in Ottawa. He became president on a Friday the 13th, and that date foreshadowed what was in store for him over the next 2 years. I caught up with Lowe last month at the CCA's AGM to chat about the unexpected challenges and how the CCA tackled them. Just a note to listeners, you'll occasionally hear Bob tapping on the table for emphasis.
It was 2 years and 11 days ago, March 13th, 2020, which was a Friday, by the way, that I got elected to the presidency of the Canadian Cattlemen's Association. That was on as I said, a Friday. We got out Friday night, and Monday they locked the country down for COVID. If you planned on traveling during your tenure, that was out. We came together. It's amazing how it happened. Just the structure of the CCA and the staff and things. We immediately set out a business plan, and one of the things that was stressed was we communicate to everybody about everything, and we keep everybody in the loop all the time. We had, weekly, bi-weekly, sometimes weekly officers meetings. We had town halls, regular town halls to keep everybody up to date. Probably weekly or bi-weekly executive meetings. I know I've become quite proficient at Teams and Zoom and Skype and everything else you can do with a computer from your kitchen table. I guess the sum total of it is we marched on. Our number one focus was to keep the borders open, keep trade happening. We managed to influence the government. They did all that. They understood the need for that too. I mean, the number one thing is we had to keep everybody fed during this thing. And of course, you hear, well, it'll end next week, and it'll end next week, and next week turns into next week, and here we are 2 years later, and it's relaxing now, but in parts of the world it's not. So who knows if we're opened up or not. But we needed to keep the borders open. We did that.
Dealing with all the COVID issues meant in-depth discussions with the CCA board and staff, especially Dennis Laycraft, Executive Vice President, and Fawn Jackson, Director of Policy and International Affairs.
Dennis Laycraft and Fawn Jackson and me would probably, after a day of Zoom meetings and interviews and strategizing, Fawn and Dennis and me would get together every night via Zoom or phone call for half an hour or maybe 3 hours to figure out what was going to happen the next day.
Oh, wow.
It was huge respect for Fawn and Dennis, but I think we all got sick of each other in a nice way.
COVID hit packing plants and processors across North America early in the pandemic. In the spring of 2020, the disease ripped through the workforce of Alberta's two big packers. Tragically, a few workers and their family members died in the outbreak. Those outbreaks also slowed production at the JBS plant in Brooks and briefly halted Cargill's High River plant. When
you have two packers control 80 or 85% of or process 80 to 85% of the cattle in Canada, one of them goes down, it doesn't take long to back up a lot of cattle. We got Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada to work hard for us with Treasury to get a set-aside program in place. Of course, none of these things ever happen fast enough, but it did happen. And when you get one of the processors goes down, it doesn't take very long to back up a lot of cattle. So we used the set-aside. We got through that backlog of cattle, which probably helped a little bit in taking the high out of the market that we were expecting to have. So we kind of got whacked there.
Once we got through that crisis, it seemed like things might be looking up for ranchers. Beef demand was strong despite rising retail prices, and market fundamentals indicated that better cattle prices were just around the corner.
Things are looking really good for the next year. You know, we produce protein in a protein-deficient world. Numbers were down. Should have been a really good year. Everybody goes into it pretty optimistic. We hit the drought last summer, which was, I believe, unprecedented in I don't know, since they've been taking temperature and rain records anyway, just for the sheer size of it. Basically, the western half of North America. Wildfires in BC, no crop in the prairies. Took away another high in the cattle market for us. And we worked with the federal government. We got some changes to agri-stability, working with the Canadian Federation of Agriculture, with the Canadian Pork Council. We got some changes to agri-stability over the course of the winter. This hit, we got the process of agri-recovery going, worked with the provinces, with the cattle feeders to get agri-recovery. And although it wasn't fast enough, I know when I went to buy hay, because we didn't get to produce any, and I talked to the guy I bought the hay from, I talked to him on a Thursday, bought some hay, told him I was going to go home and talk to the bank because I wanted another bunch. He phoned me Friday and he said, "You asked me on yesterday if the Americans were up." He said, "Well, they weren't when I talked to you, but they are now, and I've got my third cut is all I've got left." And he hadn't even started cutting it yet. So, you know, we stressed that to governments federally. The provincial members stressed it to their governments. You know, the cattle feeders came on board saying their message was the same as ours. We need to protect the mother cow. That's got to be the first order of agenda. Anyway, agri-recovery, when it did roll out, which the speed most of this stuff happens, it rolled out really fast in comparison. Not fast enough, but fast. We're working to make that a little faster even than this next time. So the price of grain is right through the roof if you could find it. So we go to, you know, we're an ingenious lot, and we head south. I believe we are the U.S.'s number one corn market this year. And this is unheard of. So we're bringing corn up to run the feeding industry. basically in Saskatchewan and Alberta, it takes a lot of corn to feed. The numbers you hear on feed are somewhere north of 1 million head, 1.1 million head or something. It takes a lot of corn. So that's rolling along. 8-9 trains a week are coming in. The corn was high priced, but it was all high priced. But we were feeding the cattle. Well, then the trains started to slow down. So we talked to CP Rail along with the cattle feeders. And they were saying, well, COVID has hit our people. The cold weather trains slow down in cold weather. They did not, actually, I believe they did not understand that cattle need to be fed. They didn't understand we didn't have a backup plan. They didn't understand that the reason that we were using all this corn wasn't because barley was too high priced. It was because there was no barley. Once they got that understanding, I know I was talking to one lady at CP Rail, and I said, when you say the trains slow down in cold weather, I understand that. Machinery does that. I said, unfortunately, cattle speed up. They eat more. Well, there was a look of shock on her face. Got that through to them. They started running trains again, and they were coming in, logistically, you can't run enough. There isn't enough trains to haul enough grain to get enough of a supply. So it's been a logistical nightmare all winter. It's kind of just in time. They picked up on the number of trains, and these are 120 to 150 car unit trains. I think we're getting depending on the week, between 9 and 12 trains a week. So we're getting close to, the last couple of weeks. Things are rolling along pretty smoothly. I'm getting pretty close to the end of my tenure. And CP Rail goes on strike, or there's threatening strike action. So I know more about trains than I ever thought I'd know, or ever wanted to know. So we went to battle again. We talked to CP Rail. We talked to the president of the Teamsters Union. Talked to, basically any politician that had listened to us, and convinced them that this had zero to do with economics. In the cattle industry case, it was all about animal welfare. Economics of feeding cattle went out the window, I don't know, last winter sometime.
Yeah.
So this is just about keeping the cattle fed.
The CCA and the National Cattle Feeders Association then held a press conference on the rail strike. Shortly after that press conference, Bob got some good news.
Well, I got a text at 2:57 Tuesday morning that said they'd agreed to go into binding arbitration, which means the train started again at, I believe, noon on Tuesday. They started running again. It was really, as far as the industry goes, very little effect on the industry. As far as corn, we had a week to 2 weeks supply in most cases, but it could have been bad. And the longer the trains shut down, the longer it takes for them to get going. So we really appreciate the fact that the government stepped in, and I believe that the Teamsters and CP Rail, nobody wanted this animal welfare thing to be on their shoulders.
And so, after a tumultuous 2-year term, Bob has handed over the presidential reins, but he remains active in the CCA as well as other industry groups. Those are just a few highlights from that interview with Bob Lowe. For the full interview, visit CanadianCattlemen.ca. The CCA also voted in a new president this spring. Reg Schellenberg ranches with his family at Beachy, Saskatchewan. Our former field editor, Piper Whelan, caught up with Reg from his ranch near Lake Diefenbaker to chat about priorities for the industry and the silver lining in the smaller cow herd numbers.
My name is Reg Schellenberg, and my wife Shannon and I and our son and his wife are ranching in south of Beachy, Saskatchewan, along Lake Diefenbaker in Saskatchewan.
And can you tell me a little more about your operation?
Our operation is a semi-arid climate. We have a lot of native range land. We are running 475 mother cows and 100 yearling heifers on 14,000 acres. And obviously, we're in a pretty semi-arid area, so stocking rates can vary, but it takes a lot of ground to support a cow in this country.
Great. So what are some of your priorities for CCA in the coming months?
I guess priorities coming up real quick here. The livestock price insurance program to be available for all the provinces from West Coast to East Coast, so that people can make the choice to lock in protection over their commodities, just like they do with other commodities, and that premium would be cost shared with government to make it more affordable. The second one would be I guess, CCA sees the importance of establishing a foot and mouth vaccine bank, and we would ask the federal government to participate in that and include that in their federal budget. Right now, I think CCA sees the inequities of our free trade agreement with the UK, and we're working hard to establish some changes that would make access for Canadian beef equal to that of the UK. We want both sides to benefit from this trade agreement.
What are some of the opportunities that you see for the Canadian beef industry on the horizon?
I think looking forward to the fact that the herds are contracting both in Canada and south of the border, it's not a positive thing that they've contracted, but long term, if the numbers are down, there will be some benefits for those that are still involved.
And what does it mean to you to take on the role of CCA president and represent cattle producers across the country?
Well, it's a big responsibility, and it's a team effort. We've got a great board, we've got a good group of officers, and our first priority is to represent the beef industry at every level, every province. And I think I've shared with you this earlier. We want to maintain a viable industry, preserve it, protect it, and promote it, and make sure that there's an opportunity for the next generations to carry it forward.
That was Reg Schellenberg talking to Piper Whelan. You can learn about Schellenberg and his priorities as CCA president in the May issue of Canadian Cattlemen. You may have noted that I said Piper Whelan is our former field editor. Since that interview, Whelan has moved on to a new position. We were sad to see her go, but we wish her all the best with her new gig. Readers will still be able to catch her work in the May and June issues of the magazine. You're listening to Between the Rows, and I'm your host, Lisa Guenther of Canadian Cattlemen. Finally, we have Fawn Jackson, Director of Policy and International Affairs with the Canadian Cattlemen's Association. Jackson discussed what was a hit and what was a miss for the beef industry in the new federal budget. And so what was your overall impression of the federal budget that just came out and how it relates to beef production?
Yeah, well, there were certainly a few pieces in there that we found quite intriguing. Investments in supply chain resiliency the last couple of years has certainly taught us how important it is to get that right. There was, as earlier indicated, a significant investment in climate smart agriculture. We were quite excited about some of the labor pieces, and then, sort of more broadly speaking, investment in rural infrastructure also had us excited. On perhaps the flip side, there was a couple of pieces that we were hoping to see and we didn't. We're really looking for an investment in a foot and mouth disease vaccine bank, and then also looking for some further investments in technical trade support within the Indo-Pacific region. So, things that we'll continue to have those conversations on with the government.
And I would hope that most of our listeners are aware of foot and mouth disease and the risks, but maybe if you could just tell us why we need see a need for like a Canadian foot and mouth vaccine bank.
Well, certainly we see it as one of the biggest economic risks in front of our industry. And of course, no, it's not here right now. And so I suppose for some folks, it's a problem of the future. But we certainly see it as a problem of right now. And I would say that we have really broad support for this, and across industry and government. And it's more so finding the right pot of money that it's going to come from. But luck favors the prepared, and we're certainly looking to be prepared. So we see this as one of our top priorities at CCA, is getting this vaccine bank up and running.
So infrastructure was an area that saw some funding. What were you pleased to see in there for rural infrastructure? And I guess perhaps given what's happened in BC in the last year and that kind of thing.
Yeah. So, one of the key parts of the infrastructure was the rural investment of about $2.75 billion for the Universal Broadband Fund to improve high-speed internet across rural and remote areas. Of course, there has never been a better example of why we need internet, than the last 2 years. But certainly, all of our businesses are dependent on having this. So we were pleased to see that as an example. And then, perhaps more of a focus on BC, there was agri recovery dollars that were flagged for to address the BC flood situation. So we were also pleased to see that. If you look at more the resilient supply chain, which, is really infrastructure, right? There was 600 million. When I think we'd start thinking about infrastructure, 600 million doesn't, of course, go very far. But what they did identify were some previously announced funds of, I think, around $4 billion, and that now those dollars are really going to be focused in on resilient supply chains. And of course, in the beef industry, we export 50% of what we produce. We have to have access to our international markets, and we have to be able to also get products to our producers within Canada. So, pleased to see that new direction, or that perhaps more focused direction on those supply chains, because I would say we see that as well as labor as being, some of our risks for the future.
This government is quite focused on environmental issues, and that was reflected in the budget as well. What does that, this is perhaps a very broad question, but what does that environmental funding mean for beef producers on the ground?
Yeah, it's interesting. There was a very significant investment in that merging of environment and agriculture, and I think it speaks to agriculture having said for a long time, we have more that we can offer for environmental solutions, but we also need investments that go with them. So, I would see this as an indication of government saying, "Great, we're excited to be your partner on this." So there was just over $1 billion announced for Agriculture Climate Solutions Fund, a new Resilient Agriculture Landscapes program, to focus on carbon sequestration and co-benefits. There was some clean technology programs, and then also a recognition on the research side that we need to continue investing there, which is a very proven place for solid investment to have environmental results. So I would say, overall, we're excited, but there's lots of details to really figure out as goes with any budget. So we'll be having those conversations with government to make sure that those investments are particularly aligned with our 2030 goals that we have, and that they're aligned with the action items that we see are key to us being able to achieve them. But, I would generally say I think it's exciting, and, just need to make sure that they're now invested in the right way.
Great. Anything else you want to add, Fawn?
We also saw an indication of some other pieces in the budget of things to come. And, one of them is that we expect that there's going to be a consultation process for Bill C-208, which was a private member's bill that has already received royal assent, but it's related to intergenerational farm transfer. So, of course, we're interested to see, the reasons for going back to look at that, and of course, we want to see that bill, stays in place in the way that it was intended to. And then there was also a couple of other interesting pieces. They've said we are absolutely moving forward with the Canada Water Agency. They didn't say where it's going to be, but of course we expect somewhere on the prairies, and we'll be watching that closely because, of course, we need to make sure that our producers have access to excellent water infrastructure, which we would see, within that department. And then also there was indication that they're going to work on a national school food policy. So interesting days ahead, and of course we'll be engaged in all those conversations.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Fawn. Thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
That was Fawn Jackson of the CCA. That's it for Between the Rows, and thanks for joining us this week. Remember, you can find the show and some extras on YouTube by searching for Between the Rows podcast. Be sure to include podcast. I'm Lisa Guenther, Canadian Cattlemen editor, signing off.
AGI West Steel manufactures the highest quality galvanized grain bins on the market. With over a century of experience, our quality designs and storage options deliver the right solution to suit your needs. Visit aggrowth.com/weststeel for more information. That's aggrowth.com/weststeel.